The dopiest of dopey Democrats, the obstructionists in Congress, including Chuck Schumer, have apparently made a 180. John, welcome back to the show. How are you?
All right, good to be back.
I think regular viewers will remember, John, that you are a former Secret Service agent, a former U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agent. You and I have been in conversation, and I was just looking at this article in The Hill, which talks about Democrats making a U-turn on their previous stance where they called the situation at the U.S. southern border a manufactured crisis. Now, you've prepared a lot of material for us to look into today, but before we get into that, if you could just speak in general terms kind of about what you used to see during your time on the border there compared to what we're seeing now. What's your evaluation of the status right now today?
Yeah, to be more accurate, I worked at U.S. Customs, which can be at the ports of entry or in between the ports of entry. Border Patrol would be the guys in green uniforms. They specifically usually chased after the illegals that would be going through the border. And then we did everything. I mean, we enforced over 40 different agencies' rules, regulations, and laws, over 400 regulations and laws. So that's a lot of responsibility. It's actually one of the biggest agencies in the United States and the biggest jurisdictions, if you want to get into it. So I handled people coming from foreign countries on cars, on foot, bicycle, boats, planes, trains, you name it. And that was the legal immigration. Some people tried to run through on those bonsai runs years ago in the 90s. I usually got myself a handful. Bonsai runs were the ones where they ran through the ports of entry just blatantly right through southbound traffic, head on into traffic lanes. And we actually had Border Patrol and some other news media people filming, and they would send that to Congress telling them, we need help at the border, we need a border fence, we need more backing. And that's when Duncan Hunter Sr., a congressman back then, now Duncan Jr. is in office, was the one responsible for actually putting some of the border fencing up that we had in the 90s to complete the fence which would go all the way across the borders.
So this is something that's been going on for years. It's not a new issue under Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I can go back and backtrack all the way that, yeah, the Democrats want the borders open because the only way they can win an election is to get illegals to come in, register them to the votes, and to get a Democrat into office, and they don't know any different, and then they're the ones in charge of the money purse, and they're the ones that are taking the major bribes. And the intel that I'm getting is that people like Pelosi and Schumer and all the other Democrats in California in particular are getting money in the millions from people like Chapo Guzman and the drug cartels.
Right. See, and I think it might be even more sinister. I think a lot of people for many years have said that Democrats want undocumented people to come in so that they can give them citizenship and get them to vote. I think it may be even worse than that. This type of immigration crisis is a common precursor to war. It's a tactic that was used in Vietnam, create an immigration crisis, overwhelm the local law enforcement, overwhelm the economy. Then a war comes. And we know that George Soros has basically made it a hobby to short international currencies, cause one currency to fail, and he bets against it and makes millions. It certainly seems like George Soros and his ilk have the United States in their sights and want to actually overwhelm and destroy the economy of the United States with this type of immigration crisis.
Well, that's an interesting aspect, a good theory, because if they can, this is what they commonly do, and I do this every day myself. I listen to the news, I try to analyze the information, I analyze what is not being reported, and then I go to other news media and other sources and other radio stations and so on and so forth daily So I'm constantly evaluating the intel that they're talking about and the stuff that they're not talking about. And for these guys, oh yeah, of course this guy's supposedly putting out millions of dollars. He's paying people to protest. And you got people out there who are left-wing, crazy nut jobs that shouldn't even be walking the streets. And they're out there doing all kinds of havoc. You know, like these left-winger groups, Antifa, you know, and stuff like that are out there just doing all kinds of trash, literally just burning cities down and doing stuff like that. And to me, it's real simple. You put the police in action. If they can't handle that, you activate the National Guard, you militarize it, and you get it cleaned up, and you put people in jail real quick, and you get that trash off the street. And then you track it down to people like this. And the funny thing is, how come they haven't followed up by tracking it back to this guy and arrested him? How come they haven't deported him or set him up in some sort of an indictment on a federal level?
Yeah.
And then other people are talking, well, it all goes back to the pedophiles and these people who are into spirit cooking and mortality stuff and all kinds of other unusual, strange theories, which is beginning to sound more and more like a day-to-day truth that's coming out.
Well, we just had that trial here in New York, the Nexium sex cult. Keith Raniere, whatever that guy's name is, found guilty on all charges. The strangest thing about that, I mean, I can understand how Stormy Daniels gets into a sex cult, but they're tying Chuck Schumer in some way. Who wants to be in a sex cult that Chuck Schumer is in? That seems ridiculous.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, because what these people have in Congress, they have some common threads. And what you have to do is you have to dig deep and find out what they're corrupt about. And if you're looking at a third world country, that's what they do. If they find that there's something wrong with you, they try to use that against you to extort you to go along with the program, which is bad or illegal or wrong. And if they could find something, it's no different than them taking pictures of you at a hotel with an underage person. Yeah. And that's an extortion technique that even the KGB used to use back in the Cold War. Right. It's still done today. It's the same type of tactics. You know, it's just nothing's changed.
You've told us a lot, John, about the corruption that you uncovered while you were working in the Customs and Border Protection Agency. But the thing that really seems apparent now is that, you know, Trump came out and said, hey, we've got an immigration crisis. And they've now used that to sort, I mean, this is part of the fuel that they're using to feed the flames of this, you know, Donald Trump is a racist narrative that they're trying to put out there. But it really seems like unprecedented assault on the border, right? There was a shooting recently at the how do you pronounce this? San
Isidro.
San Isidro port.
Yeah, Isidro. The shooting that they had, I watched one of the videos that they had. They had some guy that was like a former SWAT member on one of the local stations, and he was analyzing it. And I look at it from a totally different point of view. This guy never worked the border. He never worked at the processing stations. He doesn't know the processing rates or how they have to analyze people up close in a different evaluation scenario. But there were a lot of mistakes made, and I'm thinking, my God, even the primary officer, if they didn't see something wrong in the beginning, something else was going on. But I'm paraphrasing because of the limited information I got, but apparently the guy was trying to smuggle some Chinese in the trunk of his vehicle or in the vehicle somewhere, and he was armed, but he got forced into a situation where he got blocked off, crashed into another vehicle. Then he had like 10 or 15, up to 12 different inspectors. I counted at least about 12. And then you heard shots ringing out. And then you saw a bunch of these inspectors running away. And I go, no, that's not the training. You're not supposed to run away. This is not Monty Python's runaway scenario. You're supposed to face it, draw down, and deal with the threat and cover down. Cover is the first important thing, but if you watched it over and over again, you know, no, they didn't. There was a couple of guys that did, and then there was a couple of females and a couple other guys, they turned and ran. Okay, that's fine, but they still could have got shot running away. They were lucky. The only person that did get shot finally was the driver, and he came out shooting. Well, that
Right.
was where they should have had him directly confronted, and they had one guy turn around, come back. He must have fired off some rounds, and then he came back and drew down on him and pointed down on him. Now, see, you got all these other people running away.
That's a pretty
Couple of-
intense scene, though. Did you encounter anything like that? A dozen people in a gun battle?
No, no, I drew down on people by myself directly against people who were armed. So
And drawing down is just presenting the gun and saying, "Get out of the car, or you'll be shot."
or put your hands up, don't move. I did that in Calexico, and I safely took a guy and cuffed him up, and he had dropped a weapon, which was on a lookout, by the way, and I was specifically processing cars fast enough that, yeah, I'm just going to do it. And all of a sudden, this car came in. I said, gee, that kind of looks like the color green. Let's have him get out and open the trunk. And by the time I even barely looked around, the guy had already dropped a gun, and I had my gun out as fast as you can blink your eye. And I was yelling at him in Spanish and English. You know, can you imagine that? Don't move, no se muevan, don't move, ponga sus manos arriba, put your hands up. And I'm moving in on him at the same time with my gun pointed at him. So you have to have the training to do a certain thing, and I was lucky probably because of the way it got handled and how it went down. Other cases, you may not have that chance. They may just start shooting at you from a distance, and then you don't know where it's coming from.
Right.
You know, and we've had some of those situations occur too. Down in
You've also told us about how you've stopped human traffickers, people that were kidnapping others. I think there was even a situation where a child was involved.
Yeah. That was a case you just reminded me. There was one at Otay Mesa, which is just 6 miles east of San Ysidro. And there was a female driver who was the smuggler, smuggling with a baby,
Right.
6 months to barely a year old. And the mother was in the seat adjacent, and I believe the baby may have been in the back seat in a baby seat. But she was scared. I could tell by looking at her she was scared and there was something wrong. So by the time I started to get documents or IDs or something, she finally blurted out, "Help me, she's she's threatening to kill my baby. That's my baby." So I immediately got the engine turned off, took her into custody, cuffed her up, got some more help, had some other people so we could get the mother and then the baby, and that's what it turned out to be. So thank God we got one. But that's the lowest of the low, is the male or female, doesn't matter, where they
Right.
threaten to kill a baby.
I mean, it's unfathomable, inhuman. But of course, when these types of things happen, criminals take children hostage or, kidnap a baby because they think it's going to improve their odds of getting across the border. There obviously needs to be some sort of facility to house people overnight or for a few days while they're being processed. And also, I don't think people can reasonably expect that you can just come to the United States from Mexico or Guatemala or Congo or China or wherever and just walk in here and be like, "Hey, I'm here, so now I'm your responsibility." In fact, if that were the case, at the rates that we're hearing, 100,000 immigrants per whatever, there's a cost per person to process this sort of thing.
There's some stats that nationally they were getting like upwards of, I don't know, 1,000 something a day, which is a low average. And then the people in Washington that worked at immigration or customs were getting all upset because then the numbers increased to about 4,000 to 5,000 a day. That's too much. In other words, they have an acceptable level of, oh, that's normal. And if you spread it out over the southern border, not so much the northern border or the east and the west coast, God help us, because they come in by boat, they come in by plane, they come in by tunnels, etc., then it's still way too much. But they're talking about once it got to a certain level, then it raised flags. And that means that those reports have to go to the heads of the Department of DHS, then DHS reports to the president, and then he wants to know what's going on. And that, those people have to be processed. But just in that one example that we just talked about, let's say that the lady already had documents, or let's say she didn't. They would probably want to parole her in to help her out in exchange for their testimony, or they may want to do something.
You mean the
as a
mother?
protective custody.
The mother
Yeah,
would
the
testify
mother,
against the
actual
kidnapper.
biological mother of the child, where they would put them in protective custody or temporarily until the case is over or something like that, if that's what the case would involve. And there's many scenarios, many types of cases. They've had Iraqis come here during the Iraq War, and they would be held up in a hotel right across the border in Tijuana, right across from San Ysidro. And they would try to smuggle themselves in until we caught a few, figured out what was going on. And they said, no, they have a right to apply for political asylum. They are trying to escape a country that was going to kill them. So if they didn't come here somehow, that if they were returned or deported back to their point of origin in Iraq, they would have been killed by Saddam Hussein. So we gave them special political asylum during those years. Those people are living in the United States and in San Diego and other locations today.
Right.
But
Right.
now it appears that the Democrats are openly giving out information to other third world countries. God help us, where the Ebola is coming from in South Africa. And they're actually welcoming people, saying, no, you come here, we'll take care of you, we'll give you whatever. And under the refugee programs, which I sent you links to,
Yep.
that we have, that is a big secret. This is one of my biggest disclosures until recently, is that the Congress persons in San Diego alone, I've confronted several congressmen, Susan Davis's office, and I was told by Duncan Hunter's office to call Kamala Harris's office.
Oh boy.
And I've asked them specifically, I said, wait a minute, what about these refugees coming in? And they said, well, Susan Davis's office, Democrats are saying, well, they were vetted by the United Nations. They're allowed to come in. I said, well, is it true that they're getting like $5,000 or $6,000 a piece and all this other stuff? They refused to discuss it with me. I said, excuse me, I'm an American citizen. I live here. I'm entitled to certain benefits, and if I need benefits, I need to be able to apply for them. And they've been cutting people off of Social Security, for instance, for years. And then I disclosed something about the $2.3 trillion missing out of the Social Security fund a couple of months ago.
Right.
That's been going on. And that also came from another whistleblower who's still identified. I'm still trying to get somebody to help me with that, which they haven't done yet for safety reasons. And all I'm trying to do is verify the information, and it keeps coming up negative that, yeah, the Congress and the Senate persons are still refusing to disclose the information, that the United Nations has vetted these people, and they're allowing them to come into our country bypassing normal immigration procedures. And I go, that's not right. They're not supposed to. Even if they came here, they're giving them Social Security cards. They're giving them food stamps, EBT cards, or SNAP, or whatever you call it, depending on the program, what state you're in, and allegedly getting U.S. passports. And I said, wait a minute, U.S. passports? That's a special term. A U.S. passport is a person who's either born here
Or naturalized.
Naturalized here. It takes 5 years to be a resident. Then you can take the test after 5 years. They're not saying that. So I thought, well, maybe they misspoke. I'm trying to get that clarified. But even then, they'd still have to get an entry document. And then I've seen cases where illegal, corrupt immigration officials were actually giving out Social Security cards. And we found a box of them down at the port of entry in the trash. I said, really?
Wow.
I examined them myself. They were real cards.
Wow.
They
So
had security features. If you've got a Social Security card right now issued in the last 5-10 years, there's security features on it I can identify right away.
Well, let me just take a moment, John, to remind everybody that, your reward from the United States government for exposing all of this corruption has been to have your retirement taken from you, your Social Security taken from you. They've basically shoved you out, forced you to basically, almost put you in a destitute situation. So I do want to encourage people to visit patreon.com/John_A_Carman. You can support John by going to the page and becoming a sponsor. You can also visit John's webpage, which is, CustomsCorruption.com. I had it up here, but for some reason it's not. I must have.
No, that's okay. And I
Customs
encourage
corruption.
people to go to page 2. Page 2 is very interesting and fun because there's a lot of pictures of me with interesting people. You may even go to page 2 yourself if you can hit the top of the scroll there, the
Is
top,
it the
near
top?
the top. If you look carefully, there should be a page 2 right in
There
the
it is,
blue
right here.
section, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
there
this
you
is-
go. And if you look down, you can see pictures of interesting people. I've even got one with me and Maxine Waters off to the far right and further down on the far right. And off to the right of that picture, inside the thing is cropped off, is Gary Webb.
Yeah.
There's a picture of me when I was at the Mint. There's a picture of San Ysidro. That's the traffic back in the day before they had those license plate readers I had put in that I suggested.
So you've
That's
been
a big
around the
deal.
block quite a bit, John, and this was really one of the reasons why. Oh, there it is. I had it there the whole time. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because since Donald Trump came into office, we've been hearing. This is from October of last year, and
Right.
the LA Times saying, "Is the U.S. really facing a border crisis?" And now we hear that people are coming from Africa to Central America, South America, coming up through the Mexican border. There seems to be a real crisis. I mean, the numbers I was hearing, I apologize, I don't have them handy, but there was a breakdown of the actual numbers of people coming in, the cost of processing each of these people, and all you need to do is a little bit of math to realize that resources, money, border agents are not unlimited. And this isn't something that can just be ignored. We've got to address it. And Donald Trump has been, I think, the most aggressive president in my memory who's actually taking on a serious problem.
Yeah, and I've been emailing them at the White House and Trump for 30 months now. I'm not sure how far I'm getting with him on this stuff or his staff, but already he's lost several of his generals. Kirsten Nielsen, the head of DHS, left. I didn't think she was going to last long anyway. But they never tend to have people who have actually carried a badge, wore the gun, enforced the law, or worked the border, or worked in law enforcement, or was in the military.
Why don't
usually.
they make you the head of Homeland Security?
Do it. You'll see some changes. When was the last time you ever saw the president go down to San Diego or at Otay Mesa in history?
I mean, I don't know.
I don't ever remember anybody doing that. They came to Calexico, which is interesting because I kept telling them about the corruption in Calexico and the fact that some supervisor named Honorio Garcia, I won't mention his name, Garcia, gave back heroin, which was over 12 ounces, I think, that day. And he gave them heroin to the Mexican narcs. I said, no, it's not procedure. That's an automatic referral to internal affairs. And as soon as I got home, I had death threats on my unlisted phone number in El Centro. So I made some calls and I got transferred back to San Diego within, I don't know, days or a week or so. But it shouldn't have happened that way at all. And that guy's still working for the government and pulling a paycheck or a retirement.
Now, John, let me ask you this, because there's a lot of confusing language being used. We're hearing that, I mean, this article here in the Insider says the number of refugees the U.S. takes in has plummeted under Trump, and it's because of a tough vetting process. But I mean, isn't there a difference between a refugee and somebody who just bum rushes the border?
No. Yes and no. To be fair, most of the people that were running through the border were mostly Hispanic until you get into the OTMs, the other than Mexican status. These people who come outside of Mexico come here, even Chinese, and that's very expensive. And you get South Americans that are expensive, and they pay the smugglers or the polleros a lot of money to get through. So on an occasion, if you're just a typical, standard run-of-the-mill Mexican, you may pay $500 to $1,000, or you may know somebody and get smuggled in, or maybe you know somebody who can get you a document. Then it gets even more complicated, costs more money. When you get into South Americans, then you get into $5,000, $6,000 a piece. Then when you get into Chinese, it gets up into $10,000 a piece. God only knows after that, because I've dealt with all the other kinds of categories and Russian spy cases and stuff that gets into over hundreds of thousands of dollars and other categories. But for purposes of our discussion, a political asylee, if they know what they're doing, they're getting coached by people, okay? And they're being told how to answer questions. You've got Democrats and special attorneys who are telling people, okay, here's what you tell the inspector, here's what you tell Border Patrol. Let's say you even get smuggled in during the Obama administration and you walk up to a Border Patrol agent, and this is an actual scenario that happened because he ordered the Border Patrol to stand down and not take action against those people if they were here, which means they could come up to you and say, look, I'm here illegally, I want my notice to go to an immigration judge, and they have to give it to you, and you say thank you, and they walk away and disappear for 9 months, and you never see them. But they've got a document that shows that they got it, and it dates a time, which means they've established some sort of a time frame.
So they have some sort of a temporary status. If they get stopped by local police or something, they say, I'm waiting for my court appearance.
Exactly. So they're protected in a legal sense.
And if you're a gang member and you know that that's happening, it basically incentivizes intelligent criminals to come here and obtain that. You do a lot of havoc in 9 months.
Right, right. The point is you have to separate the normal refugees who are looking for help, the men, women, and children. But typically you're seeing all these Maltruchas that might sneak in, which is the Salvador Dorche 13, which is the MS-13 people who are very, very bad and dangerous people, and all they need is a machete. They'll cut you up. They don't need guns, but they
and of course
do
these
everything.
guys are working to find the loopholes and make their way in there. I mean, when we hear people on the news and we see people like Ocasio-Cortez, you know, she thinks this is easy, but you're describing an extremely complicated problem. When you detain 3 individuals, one of them an infant, one of them the mother who's there under duress, and one of them a criminal, well, how do we handle that? I mean, I personally have never seen a migrant detention center, but this article from The Intercept.
What we're getting into now is we found out that what some of these smugglers are doing is they're literally borrowing somebody's child so that they can come up, claim some sort of an asylum, claiming that that's their child and hoping that they're going to be processed because they have an infant.
Yeah.
When it turns out, in fact, that when they do a DNA check, that they're not related to that child at all.
Right. The point I'm getting at is, you know, what we're looking at right here looks very much like a prison, of course. But, you know, when you're an agent on the border, you don't necessarily know what the intention is of someone who is coming here. You know, these aren't people who have entered properly and done the necessary legwork, paperwork, whatever it is. Even if you are a migrant, there is a way, or I should say a political refugee, there is a way to do that, right? To present yourself, not just running through the border or crossing over the desert.
Because even when I was Secret Service in Washington, D.C., I was trained as early as 73, 74, in spite of my other training in law enforcement or degrees in law enforcement. But we specifically had special training through the Department of State that if an embassy official, let's say a Russian ambassador, came out and he was standing on public territory, public domain, on a public sidewalk, and he says, I want political asylum. Take me with you. Okay, you have to grab him, take him away, get him away from that embassy, and get on the radio right away so you can get him protection and get a unit to come out and pick him up. And then they'll take him to another safe location, and then they're going to search him and check him to make sure he doesn't have any weapons or contraband or whatever on him, and they're going to process him. A similar situation will happen with these people, but there's a big difference that nobody understands unless you actually have apprehended people before at the border or criminals in any category. Most of these people may be treated differently by the type people that they are. They're just trying to get out of a bad situation. They'll let you search them. They're complacent. They're compliant. They'll go along with what you need to do to get the job done. When you're searching a bad guy, It's totally different. Then you have to put cuffs on them. Then you have to struggle sometimes. I've actually intercepted a guy who I still question today who could have been involved in some activity later who tried to damage me. And I had to put cuffs on the guy because he was trying to resist arrest. And he was a walk-through or a run-through done at the same port of entry. And that's not normal. Normally, you grab them, they immediately are complacent or compliant with you, rather, and they go along with the program. But when you have to search them, this guy resisted. That means he had a contraband. He could have a weapon. You don't know what he had.
Right.
And I found his wallet concealed in a sock or something, and that had his true identity. And it turned out he may have been an informant with one of our agencies, but he didn't want to tell that issue because he was illegally entering, which would have been a violation of his status at that time.
So, a violation of his agreement with whatever agency?
Exactly.
So if he's there informing on the cartels or something, living in Mexico, informing to the DEA or the FBI, that deal doesn't include him illegally entering the U.S.
Right. Normally they would have given him a document anyway. But there was something else going on with this guy, so I had to use a little force to get this thing, cuff him up, find out what was going on. And it gets kind of complicated because then I had a female supervisor who was a new supervisor, and she didn't do anything. She just stood there and looked like, oh my God, what are you going to do? Well, why don't you get me some help? I don't want to hurt the guy, and I know martial arts, but I still don't want to have to use my force on him or pull a gun on him or something else, which I'm entitled to do under the law. But you know, it just gets off into another discussion. This incompetent female, and she still works there today, by the way.
Sounds like there's a lot of incompetence there.
Well, I want to take the Peter principle.
I want to take you to another topic that I'm sure is as shocking to you as it is everybody else. Ocasio-Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has been very vocal in calling these migrant detention centers concentration camps. Obviously, some of the anti-Trump rhetoric has included calling him Hitler, despite the fact that his daughter and his grandchildren are Jewish. I think, in my opinion, there's a pretty big difference between a police force coming to your home, forcibly removing you from there and putting you into a camp where the intention is to make you into a slave and or kill you, versus what's happening here in the United States, where a large group of people are entering illegally. Some of them have legitimate reason to be here, but we have no way of knowing if they are criminals, terrorists, kidnappers, or whatever. So we need to put them in these detention centers to sort them out. Certainly we're not gassing, killing, torturing, or making them slaves there. It's pretty out of line for Ocasio-Cortez.
And I've studied World War II and concentration camps. I actually know some people that were in Auschwitz. Nicholas Gruner, I just remembered his name. I was trying to remember his name earlier. He's like in his 90s. And he had a tattoo. That famous guy, Elie Wiesel, who would always have his arm exposed, never had a tattoo. And he passed away just last year, I think. But to have a congresswoman at the age of 29, by the way, that's her age, to throw around the term concentration camp has no real idea or firsthand knowledge of what it is compared to actually being processed inside of one of these detention centers, which is what we need to do when we apprehend large numbers of people at any age, sex, and we have to separate them by family, separate them by sex. They have to pat them down, search them for weapons and contraband. Then they have to categorize them and find out their identities and fill out forms and document. They have to feed them. They have to put them in an area where they have access to a bathroom and water and stuff like that. And they've had some bad luck with people even being put at the port of entry in detention, where they've had some untimely deaths in the past. Even DEA's had some problems with putting somebody and forgetting about them for hours and hours. And that's just not the procedure. They're supposed to keep an eye on you and monitor people and always have somebody watch and look for you, if not monitoring you 24/7, or a minimum average of every hour they check on you to make sure you're okay Is that person alive? Do they need anything? Medical, food, water, whatever. Because you have no idea what type of stress, injuries they may have incurred,
Right.
or in recent cases where they had to go to the hospital because they were suffering from some tuberculosis-related contacts with other aliens or other diseases.
Right. Well, and of course, there's also a matter. I mean, again, we can look at these situations from a number of different perspectives. This article in the Intercept is talking about how a 5-year-old girl nearly died of an untreated ruptured appendix. But we're talking about centers that are processing thousands of people. They're not necessarily going to be able to attend to everyone immediately, and a ruptured appendix is something that can develop quite quickly. So I'm not saying that this is a good thing.
Also, like when I went through training as a police officer, you do special first aid. I was an EMT trained. We did primary, secondary triages, which means I look you over to see if you have any generalized type of issues, to the point of palpating just to make sure you don't have any broken bones or bruising or bleeding or hematomas, whatever. And that's the type of thing that they would have to do when they're processing. I don't think Border Patrol or even Immigration and Customs is in depth on being EMT qualified.
Right. But
they do have a certain amount where they do have doctors that do come in that do serve under the public assistance programs and the federal programs that do have doctors on site, and they're part of the social services and other agencies where they're supposed to come in. Public health, I was trying to remember the name, like APHIS, part of public health and stuff,
but John,
stuff like that.
I don't know if people like Ocasio-Cortez and those who support her and the notion of having open borders and just providing all these resources to people who maybe have bad intentions for what they're going to do once they're here in the United States. I don't know if those people realize that individuals like you and veterans of our government agencies and military are struggling to pay their medical bills and to pay for their housing. What they want to give out money to people who are coming from Congo with Ebola, but they're not concerned about whistleblowers, they're not concerned about veterans, they're not concerned about former Secret Service agents, U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents who aren't being taken care of. We're hearing about reparations for slavery. We're hearing about giving out money to people who come from whatever country they come from. We're hearing about money for a Green New Deal, but we're not taking care of the people who are already here in the United States and who need our financial support.
Yeah, and I've served 20 years, a little over 20 years to this country, specifically in federal law enforcement. But to give a more specific answer in explaining that when people come through, it's just like when you come to the border. What's your citizenship? I can ask what your citizenship is, where you were born. I can ask a number of questions, but I may ask, what was the purpose of your trip?
Yeah.
Where you just came from? Where are you going? That type of thing. Those are all evaluation questions, and if you don't answer them correctly and it doesn't sound right, then I can detain you and keep you inside so that an immigration official may detain you, depending on what your situation is or who you may be or pretend to be. And it's like you just said, it's a shock to me. I mean, it's like, my God, I sacrificed my life protecting presidents, and I spent 20 years because I thought fighting the war on drugs, and then I saw pictures of U.S. military and United Nations troops at the Afghan poppy fields, and they're protecting the poppy fields. That's just further confirmation. I've seen this before, and it just irritates me that we're protecting that. And even Trump is saying, oh yeah, the opioid crisis, and I seized a bunch of heroin at the border, and our own Hispanic American officials gave the heroin back to Mexican narcotics people to be smuggled again, basically,
Yeah, so
It does
for
make sense.
all the Ocasio-Cortezes who think we have all this unlimited money, I mean, there's so much money being wasted by the type of corruption that you're describing. You know, John, we've got over 200 people watching us right now. I definitely want to encourage,
Oh,
maybe if there's 10 among the 200 who can go over to patreon.com/John_A_Carman. Let's try to get John up to 30 patrons by the end of this show. Could we do that? The guy's here sacrificing his life to protect the border, and he gets basically crushed and thrown away like an empty soda can. I think we should try to turn that around for John. Now, John, you've sent me a couple of articles here about how the U.S. refugee system works. I tend to think that information coming to us from the Council on Foreign Relations might not be unbiased, if you know what I mean. They seem to have an agenda, but what is it that this article wants to tell us about how the refugee system works?
Well, basically, and I'll just use the picture that I'm looking at now. Those people look like they could be in Sarajevo for all I know, someplace in Europe, maybe one of the Eastern Bloc countries, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And when they have some sort of political issues in their country, well, let's say it could be Syria under Assad. And those people were trying to get out because Assad was not protecting his own people, but in fact they were trying to support some other regime. And then you've got war, you've got people out there that are not getting food, water, or medical attention. So that's an automatic attention for the United Nations to get involved, where they could actually send troops, they could send planes, they could drop supplies for these people. But it's like out of the realm of imagination to imagine, oh, why don't you guys just get on a plane,
and
which
come
they
over,
have,
right,
and fly them back to the United States, and they'll give you a place to live, and you can be immigrated. They'll give you money, they'll give you public assistance, they'll give you food and water and medical, and $6,000 a month. And I've been quoted this actual amount. And entry documents or U.S. passports. And I go, my God, really? I mean, that sounds good enough that I should take that program.
Right. Move to another country and then come back in as a migrant. I wonder how many people watching right now even make $6,000 a month.
Not many. I mean, if you put 20 to 30 years in the government, you're lucky to get that much on retirement.
Wow.
And my dad worked 30 years for the United States Navy, and he retired as a full commander. Some of the guys I've talked to at U.S. Customs that retired out that were double dippers, they were lucky to get just $8,000 a month after 20 years plus. The amount of money does not match. And the other thing is the government lies because they're supposed to match up what you put into the system, but you don't see it until you survive and live it and get out.
Right.
You don't get to see the accrual. You don't get to see the interest. If you put $30,000 in, they're supposed to match it with $30,000. That means you've got $60,000 for the rest of your life, supposedly. Mm. So after you use up your half, then they're supposed to pay the other half. Or let's say you put in $100,000, they're supposed to match it up with another $100,000. Well, you should be living $10,000 a month, easy. Easy, right?
Yeah.
Tax-free?
It's pretty good.
No, not tax-free. That's another problem. They double taxes. What was that thing? Taxation without representation. They tax you on the first paycheck, and then when you collect it years later, they tax you again on the retirement that you already paid into, or Social Security. No, that's wrong.
Then they use that tax money to pay people who are giving the heroin back at the border. And guarding the heroin in Iraq.
Or John Heinrich, the district director up in Long Beach, who I've talked about, who got $250,000, and still to this day, nobody's been calling me on my cell phone yet, and I'm sitting here watching it. Nope, it hasn't gone off the hook. I haven't missed a call. No 202 numbers, right? So it's working. It's been charged up. I charge it every day, but I'm kind of being sarcastic and facetious, but that's 167 people that were allowed to come into the United States unchecked, and that's against the law. That's a felony. If I had the right backing right now, or if Trump were to say, hey, John, we're going to reinstate you, there's going to be a couple agents. We want you to go somewhere and identify this guy, and you're going to be part of the arrest and arrest this guy. I'll say, good, do it.
Right.
I'll do it.
Well, I hope that they do.
Well, there's another law that they don't want you to know, is that, Jason, you got to hear this. And I have so much information, but have you ever heard the term misprison of felony?
Yes.
We've discussed this before, and or misprison of treason.
Treason, yes.
Which is also a serious treason, felony, high-ranking crime. So that means that when you turn over information of a violation of law to a federal official, a U.S. attorney, an FBI agent, an attorney general, I'm naming these names specifically because I've notified these people, and you tell them of a violation of law up to the high ranks of Janet Reno and Bill Clinton, Office of the President, and so forth, and they don't take action on this, they're guilty of a felony. Right now, as we speak, they are guilty of a felony, which means the current administration could go out and issue indictments on them right now, and how come they're not under arrest and taken to Gitmo?
Right.
Or some other nice vacation point, at a federal prison somewhere.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, John. I'm trying to find our video about the Heinrich overflight, and that's an interesting...
that was just a document. You can Google it, or if
I've got
I
it
can
here.
do the chat thing, I might be able to pull it up.
I've got it right here. People can go back into the Crowdsource the Truth video archives, and they can look up the John Heinrich, or just the name Heinrich. And one of our recent videos, you spoke to us about this overflight list that gave numerous aircraft and individuals unfettered access to various ports of entry around the United States, where they would just totally not be checked by customs. It was basically a smuggle all the drugs you want pass for whoever was on that list. So that's
exactly. I mean, I had the names and the dates of birth of each of these people, and I ran it by another friend of mine who was at work at U.S. Immigration, and I had him verified. He says not one of those people has a passport or an entry document to come in the United States, and yet John Heinrich, a district director up in Long Beach, was authorizing the entry of these people, and I verified through immigration, I verified through the district director in San Diego that they couldn't do it, and I reported it to Internal Affairs, and the guy never got arrested.
Nothing.
And I talked to his brother-in-law on a radio show, just like we're doing right now, except it wasn't as nice as yours. You do a much better job.
Thank you.
And we went right into the disclosure, and he says, John, we have to go off the air. And I said, what's going on? He said, do you know who this guy is? I said, no, he's just some district director trying to get away with some, serious violations here. He says that's his sister's engaged to be married to him. Christine Gerner supposedly married this guy, and that there was $250,000 deposited to a special bank account. I said, really? That's $250,000. That's a nice little down payment for a brand new car, a nice house at the beach in the Palisades, and a few other things, and your retirement.
Yeah.
I could use a snitch fee out of that one.
Of course. Now, John, let's go over some of this other information that you sent me. We've got just a few more minutes here. Sure. So this is from the Health and Human Services Agency.
Click on to the first one on the San Diego County. It'll give you an idea of what the amounts are. It should show a little table there.
So what do we got
gives
here?
The actual amounts and the people, the categories of the people. If you go off to the left a little bit, you can see the left margin.
Yeah, we've got Afghanistan. They've got 159 people.
I can't see it on my end, but...
Sorry. Yeah, it might be a little far away for you to see. But this is basically giving us from October 2018 through May of 2019. So this is pretty up to the minute. We've had 159. Looks like Afghanistan is...
But it's not accurate information. My information shows that it's much more than that. Those are sanitized amounts. I'm hearing upwards in hundreds every day.
Yeah, I mean, this seems remarkably low. I mean, this is saying that 3 people from Mexico came into the United States in the past 6, 8 months? That seems ridiculous.
Of course. And those planes are actually coming in from military planes, special commercialized planes that are coming in that are, oh, I can't think of the terms right now. They're chartered. In other words, the government charters them. They bring them in as refugees from various countries. But I wanted you to get a look at the ones from the Middle Eastern countries, or the ones that had the highest numbers, like 96, and then followed all the way over, and 141, and see what the category was.
Well, we've got Haiti at 141, Democratic Republic of
Right.
Congo at 96.
Right. Think about it. What's familiar about Haiti just recently? People were getting sick.
Right.
They had a high incidence of AIDS in the Haitian country, believe it or not, years ago. And the Clintons supposedly were going to donate or put a bunch of money down there to help the people during the hurricane season. They didn't, and a lot of people lost their lives. That didn't happen. What happened to the money?
Right.
You see. So that goes back. But then also now you're looking at the Congo. What's familiar about the disease and the type of people that get sick is Ebola.
Right.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that picture? All of a sudden, we're importing people with these catastrophic diseases like the flesh-eating viruses.
Right.
Why would we want to import anybody from that country right now?
I can give you one possible explanation as to why they would want to do that. Ebola
Well,
vaccine. See, when they get everybody
you
thinking
go.
there's an Ebola crisis, now they can force people. Ebola vaccine candidates against Ebola have
Exactly.
been developed in the decade prior to 2014, but none have yet been approved for clinical use in humans. Several promising vaccine candidates have been shown to protect non-human primates against the lethal infection. So, you know, look at this. As recently as April, we've got news that the vaccine shows impressive performance in an outbreak. So now all they need to do is get everybody all freaked out about an Ebola outbreak here in the United States, and then you've got pharmaceutical companies that will undoubtedly earn billions
Exactly.
from an Ebola
Perfect.
vaccine.
Now, what's interesting about my background is that I was also cross-designated Food and Drug Administration. So that made me an FDA inspector. Anything that came into contact with the human body has to be inspected by U.S. Customs, our cross-designation, and then let's say you have a nasal cannula, or you yourself have an earpiece that comes into contact with the human body. That means that piece of plastic that's processed in Mexico, that may be a nasal cannula because of an air breather or some other device, we have to inspect it, and it has to be processed and passed and inspected a certain way. And anything that comes into contact with the human body, or vaccines, pills, vitamins, or medications, which takes what, Food and Drug 10 years to process before it's approved? Yeah, that's the average time frame, 10 years. So these people that are processing somebody for a vaccine, they've been doing it for up to 10 years already. That means we've been preparing for it for a long time. So if you go back 5, 10 years, who was the president the last 8 years before Trump?
Yeah.
And how many people were coming into the country when Border Patrol was being told to stand down? This guy from Africa, Kenya, Mombasa. You know, I mean, he wasn't from Hawaii. He was from Mombasa. His birth certificate's from over there. I know this stuff. I've talked to the people on the Cold Posse team that went to Hawaii. I know the investigators. I've talked to them. But if you look at the scenario, what was that movie that came out years ago that was about the disease that was brought in, and it was a special outbreak? That's it. And they did other movies about the same thing, and then they had these guys flying in helicopters like it was the Andromeda strain all over again, right? It's the whole thing about them putting a scare to everybody so that, oh my God, that looks familiar. I saw that right away. And you go, yeah, that's what they do. They put the scare on everybody so that everybody's going to follow orders, like that place in Jonestown with what's-his-face, Reverend what's-his-name? Drinking,
The
drank
Kool-Aid,
the
right.
Kool-Aid.
People who think that this is a silly thing, we just had the Citizens Grand Jury the other day, and the video is going to be coming very soon. But Dr. Jerome Corsi wrote the book about this birth certificate, and I believe he was pivotal in assembling Sheriff Arpaio's cold case posse with Mike Zullo. And,
Oh, yeah.
And Dr. Corsi has been derided by the mainstream news and maniacs on the left. I mean, just at first glance, this is the actual document from the Obama White House archives. They're really, it took not 5 years for me to investigate this, but about 5 seconds. This one is a different color than August 8th, 1906. Like, whoever forged this, why couldn't they at least get the color right? The one is wrong.
Well, I was just explaining this to somebody recently. What happened was they went back into the database and found out, first off, there is no birth certificate for a man named Barack Hussein Obama in Hawaii during 1961, if I remember correctly.
Right.
And what they did was somebody at the White House got into the database, took an exact duplicate template picture of the same similar birth certificate, which was the one they used, and then they transferred the data. Sorry?
Joanna Ani, I think, was the person whose
Yes.
birth certificate they took.
Yes. And then even if you duplicated certain information, typed in 16 layers? 16?
We're going to
Something
find
layers?
that right now. We're going to look at that right now.
Oh, no, I was just trying to remind in case you remembered. But it was about 16 layers. But here's the thing. There's no way, you cannot duplicate a hand stamp. You can go through and type information. You can transfer and drag back and forth dates and blocks of information. You type in Obama's name, you type in the doctor's name, which was a different doctor, you type in the location of a doctor's hospital, which was not there at that time, that didn't exist, and then you type in other information. But you cannot duplicate a hand stamp because a human hand stamp cannot stamp it exactly no matter what. There's always going to be a variation
difference, right?
This much or whatever. Even if you're stamping documents at the port of entry and passports all day long, you cannot duplicate it. This one was so matched that all you had to do is superimpose it right over the other original.
Yeah.
And it was so exact, it was like, oh
to
my
the
God.
pixel. Yeah, it matched to the pixel for sure.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of visual effects work, particularly in my work in stereoscopic 3D, where things had to be aligned perfectly, and really the magic of that art is in the subtle differences, where I became very, very sensitive to slight differences between images.
It's too bad he didn't pick Illinois or some other state, because I've actually intercepted actual blank birth certificates from other states at the border, blank, which means I could have taken it home, put it in a typewriter, and typed in the information if I had a guide to give me the proper information, which is what they do in a lot of these shops down in foreign countries or in Mexico or whatever. But they had two separate forensic specialists in France and maybe Italy or one of the two different countries in Europe who were renowned rather. And they were the ones that were objective, and they were the ones that looked at the documentation, and they pointed out all this stuff independently. And I believe Mark Zullo came up with another a YouTube interview, which was about an hour long, which I watched a couple of years ago, explaining all that. And I talked to one of the investigators who's now working at one of the DA's offices, and she's a prosecutor now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's there has been an extensive multi-year investigation into this birth certificate, and I mean, really, if Adobe Illustrator were ever open, I don't know why it's taking 20 minutes for it to do that, but you can just tell right away. Thomas Tyson is telling us it was intended to be seen as fake. I don't know why they would intend that. But yeah, there was some woman who went on a plane to retrieve this PDF document, which I don't understand why they didn't just email it. But that woman died, and of course they have refused to, actually release the piece of paper that
Oh, let me
would...
see if I can pull it up. Hold on a second.
So here, I've got it right here. We've got the birth certificate. And the thing, this is old news for many people, but sometimes there's people who maybe haven't seen it. So this is a PDF document opened within Adobe Illustrator. And what you were talking about with the layers is all this bit of business here. Normally, if you just take a document and scan it, it doesn't have all these different layers. And you can see we can turn off different layers of this document. You're going to notice elements of it disappearing.
Yeah, I've got his birth certificate. I've got his selective service card, which is altered on the stamp. I've got his passport, which is kind of funny.
So there it is right there. This is the strange part. Now, there is someone who tried to debunk this and said that the fact that I can turn off this layer of type and have this white stuff underneath it with certain letters that stay there. I mean, this is incredibly unusual behavior for a document like this. This is supposedly a scan of a paper document, but
right.
I disagree. This is a digitally constructed thing. And those who think that OCR will do this, only demonstrations I've ever seen of optical character recognition separating the type from the background are black type on a white background. This crosshatch color background is an anti-forgery background that's intended to defeat those types of features. And what we're looking at here is a piece of digital artwork that has been created. It really is kind of astounding. But John, we're just about out of time. Was there anything else you wanted to share with our viewers?
Well, I was just going to add a little note here is that all this time that Obama was in office, he finally admitted it several times throughout his administration. And then finally, after he left office, he admitted it before a bunch of people who admitted he was proud to be the first sitting president from Kenya or something to that effect. And he just openly admits it right there. And everybody's just like clapping and like, yeah, we got away with it. We did it. We pulled one over the Republicans or whatever the attitude was. I go, you know what? That's high treason. And all those people involved in that can still be indicted today. It's not like it expires after 6 months or 2 years.
Yeah. But
and yet nobody wants to talk about that.
Right. They've spent more time and energy saying that Jerome Corsi and Donald Trump are conspiracy theorists, and virtually no time looking at actual evidence to come to a conclusion. But we'll continue to explore this in the future, John. I want to thank you for coming on the show again and sharing this information. Good news, we've got 2 new sponsors for John on his Patreon page. I hope that some of the more than 200 people who are watching us right now will go over to patreon.com/John_A_Carman and become a sponsor of John's page. Let's give John our financial support. He's spent so much of his time and so much of his life upholding the law, protecting the border, and really making the sacrifices that have kept us all safe. I hope people will also go to patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. Tons of great subscriber exclusive content on there. We've got a really fascinating show coming tomorrow on the intelligence assessment with Kevin Shipp, and last night's episode of More Pain is up there for people to enjoy at patreon.com/crowdsource the truth or subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. My guest, John Carman. Thank you for joining me, John. We'll have you back very soon. Best of luck to you there.
Yeah, I want to encourage people to ask questions, and if they have a subject they want me to cover, I'm open. I used to do that on radio shows from years ago, and I know Kevin Shipp. He's a good man, so I'm sure he'll give you some good information too.
What's the best way for people to get in touch with you, John?
They can get in touch with me through my Facebook or through my email, which is john.a.carman@gmail.com. I could type it up here real quick if you want.
I think people got that. They can go back and get it. John, thanks for joining me. Thanks everybody for watching. Have a great night. I'll see everyone tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye-bye.